Hey everybody, well, we just got a chance to get off a call with one of our favorite people on the planet, Dr. Pompa. He's been a huge inspiration in our lives, just massive, and we had an amazing conversation.
Yeah, a lot of what we've been teaching and bringing to all of you has really come through our relationship with him and his mentorship and understanding the world and our bodies in such a different way that we're able to relay that information from a place that brings in that upstream stuff and the detoxification and all that, but then really the bigger thing, the heart of healing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key concepts that we've really appreciated about his teachings is 180-degree solutions. And that is, when everybody's going this way, we go the opposite way. And that's served in so many different ways because it's very common for us to move into a groupthink kind of understanding around things. But when we actually, dig in, we listen to those stories, we listen to hope, we do the research, we're able to find what actually makes sense for us as individuals. And a lot of that story that he shared today was about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really good one to listen to. It's going to take you different parts of your brain, different parts of your heart, and we really hope you enjoy it.
Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Health Ignited with my lovely wife, Dr. Sonya Jensen. It's episodes like this where we get a chance to speak with some of our favorite people on the planet. And this gentleman we're speaking to today is none other than Dr. Pompa. He's been a man. I'm just going to introduce you in the way that we know you, Dr. P. But he's been someone who's been near and dear to our hearts for so many years. It's very rare where you see this passion light up within someone. They're calling to that higher consciousness and that higher love and their higher spirit, and to be able to share the journey for people in such a profound, emotional, and also just deeply scientific kind of way. And so Dr. Pompa has brought us so many gifts in our practice and has helped change the way that we help people. So Dr. P, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, I love you all too. And can't spread this message with just one person. You all are impacting thousands. And so thank you for that as well.
Yeah, you came into our lives at such a perfect timing because I think Nick really was searching for a mentor at that time. And we felt quite alone, I believe, in our association and with our colleagues, and almost misunderstood a little bit too. And then here we saw you on stage with all this passion and understanding and this deep knowing of wanting to spread, like Nick was saying, this information so that we can heal the world. And we've just loved what you've done for us as a family and for our practice and everything that you're doing. So I just wanted to say thank you.
I appreciate that. That means a lot to me as well. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's 1,000 different things that I love picking your brain on, Dr. Pompa, but one of the things that I think would be most helpful for people going through the challenges of the time right now is one of your core concepts, and that core concept being 180-degree solutions. And that is, when we're faced with challenge in life, it's so common where we kind of just move into our habits, we move into complacency, we look for someone to tell us what to do. And, I remember hearing stories early on how you've kind of always gone against the grain a little bit, and it's served you very well. And you talk about this with your history of dyslexia and whatnot too. But I'd love for you to break down this concept of 180-degree solutions for people.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. If you watch the media, read the media, newspapers, magazines, you name it, whatever advice they're giving regarding health, do 180 degrees opposite, and somehow you land on the truth every time. It's funny, it's like, I think that was just instilled in me from my father. It's in, he was a big baseball fan, and, he said the best players were the ones that just seemed to move, in the opposite direction everyone else, right? Like even before the ball was hit, they seemed to gravitate. They picked up on little clues, where the person was like, aiming or, whatever you want to call it in baseball, but they would always move opposite and somehow to where the ball was, and I remember there was I was on an airplane. It was something about the greatest of all time. It's a documentary, and they interviewed, and there was a theme there, right? Wayne Gretzky really stood out to me, and I'm no big hockey fan, but Wayne Gretzky, when he was a little boy, he would sit there for hours and hours, and he would just trace where the puck went. This is what he would do. As he would watch the hockey game, and he would just sit there and he would just trace. And his father would always be like, what are you doing that for? I don't know. I just like to do it. So what made Wayne Gretzky the greatest hockey player ever was the fact that he somehow always knew where the puck was going to be. And I believe it was this subconscious tracing of, like, his subconscious was able to pick up on, just where it was going to be. When everyone else was going this way, he absolutely was going in a different direction. And, like, how did he end up with the puck? But that is really, it all falls into this 180-degree solution, right? Somehow you do the opposite of where the masses are going, and somehow you nail it every darn time, just like Wayne Gretzky. How did he end up with that puck? So that being instilled in me, I always looked at things when the masses were accepting something, and I would say, maybe it's not right, right? And of course, there's exceptions to every rule, right? But, it really became something that I saw in healthcare, especially, that when the masses grabbed onto something, there was either some apparent lie or some big mistake, and later everyone found out it was absolutely wrong. So that's where it came from, Nick.
Mm-hmm. I think it takes a lot of emotional resilience to do something like that, because our brains are so wired to go with the grain, right? To go with or go in the direction that everybody's going in, because if we don't, we're not in the tribe, we're kicked out, and then our survival mechanisms kind of show up. So how do you discern that within yourself, or how did you bring that out in you so you're able to discern the information and move in that direction? And how can others do that for themselves?
You're right. It takes way more energy to go, the other direction, for sure, right? But I think there's also this thing in me that just, I love hunting for truth. All right. And there's something that, I just can't stand when people are deceived. And God gives us all different gifts, right? And one of mine is being able to read a lot of literature and different things, and, just be able to look for truth. I have a desire to look for truth and a desire to communicate it. Because of that, maybe I feel some responsibility when, everyone's going this way. I was like, hey, you're going the wrong way. And of course, that's not always met with the best, the best feedback, coming back at you. But in a certain, you develop a tough skin too, right? Where it's like, dang it, I'm going to stick up for the truth here, right? Despite it, if it's right, it's right. Come on. I mean, I've been wrong too, right? And but most often, the right way is opposite of the way people are going, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, there's something to be said too when things aren't, like, let's say you take a position, and let's say someone, let's say you get it wrong. There's a quality within you and with a lot of people who choose to be honest and go, what, I got that one wrong. And I was following the best science that I thought was available to me, and I got it wrong. In leadership, we expect that, in a doctor, we expect that. I mean, I don't know how many times it's been where, I've said to a patient, I don't know, but I will do whatever I can to find out for you. And I'll ask my colleagues, and I'll look deeper into this, because it forces us to be better. And, you're someone who's willing to do that. And I gotta say, I love that you brought in Wayne Gretzky. You're talking to a couple of Canadians. Yeah. So we know the hockey analogy was perfect.
I was going to use Mario Lemieux. No, it actually was great, Wayne Gretzky. It really was. And it was an amazing documentary. When you looked at, like, the greatest, it's never what you think. Gretzky was not the fastest skater. He wasn't the quickest. What made him so darn great? And I believe it was that, that he just always was going opposite direction, and ended up where the puck was. That was it.
Yeah. Well, and, I think in the world that we're living in right now, we're being told so many things, and so many things feel like they're kind of going this way and that. And there's this inherent drive, as Sonya said, to be a part of the tribe and just sort of keep following, the puck and where it's going, not anticipating where it's actually going to be, which is really the blessing. So how do you help people sort of transition into, okay, wait a second, things are maybe not as they seem. How do we sort of work through a bit of that cognitive dissonance? And it could be something as simple as, like, the fat issue, like our fat's bad, all the way up to, our current, things that are the current crises in the world that we're facing right now, whether it be masks and everything else. But how do you help people sort of change their trajectory into looking to that anticipatory event of where things could be going versus getting so lost on the right now?
One thing I found, right, with my ability to remember, facts, statistics, studies, there was a time where I thought that would change people, right? Surely, if you just gave them enough information, they'll change directions. Unfortunately, that's not true, and darn it with the mask thing, if I didn't make the same mistake again, right? Where I literally started acquiring studies that masks don't work, and the Cochrane collaboration, which looks at thousands of studies, and they have a way of narrowing in good studies versus bad studies. And I think they looked at masks from 2016 to present. And at that time, I think it was in June, and they came out with, they don't work, right? Oh gosh, that's going to be all over the media. Like, this will convince everybody. Zero, crickets, nothing, right? Okay, so I fell into my own trap of like what I learned didn't work, just because I thought, oh my gosh, everyone's talking about the science. Let's bring it. Let's figure it out. Okay, so what I found even in this current situation is stories, meaning that you start to tell a story about how masks affected this young man, right? And you tell a story about what's going on, the fact that here's a group of people that just didn't wear masks, and they're it's like people can understand stories better than statistics. So even with the current thing with the jab, it's like, look, the stories are changing people. The stories are making people dig a little deeper for the truth. When you tell the story about the person that you knew, that got the jab, and let me tell you what happened, people go, maybe it's not what we think, right? But if you tell just people science, that blows right over their head. They just don't understand. And how could all of these people be wrong? How could all the experts be telling us one thing, right? Their brain just can't even accept that. And that was the way it was for the mask. But a story will step people back and say, oh, I don't want to be that, right? So that's my advice. And that means it's something we all can partake in. You tell the stories of lives that changed, or you tell the stories that lives that have been affected. And that's really how you move people.
Well, we're so emotion driven. And that's now, right, the climate really is so emotional. So everyone's making emotional judgments or decisions. So if you can bring it back to also from the mind, I feel like into the heart, because the mind is always looking for danger. It's always looking for ways out. Whereas, getting them into their heart a little bit of like the bigger picture of life and why, and questioning and understanding that, the innate potential that we always speak to, that there is in the body and healing, but also in their own discernment of information. We know the truth, but the fear kind of blocks that truth, and we can't listen to it, or we can't hear it.
Well, when you look at how the brain works, and you're 100% right what you're saying, because we make decisions from the fear place of our brain. The primitive lobe is where we can quickly make a decision. The intellectual part of our brain, we don't make decisions there. It's very difficult to make decisions there. We make slower decisions, painfully, but so when someone hears something emotional, they can easily go, okay, yeah, well, I'm not doing that right now, right? It's very quick. And that's really, when you think about really how they got people to do what they did, which amazed me. It was very emotional. Like, so despite the facts, the numbers, the figures, ultimately, if you knew somebody that this virus affected, that was, I'll put quotes around it, healthy, well, that was enough fear right there, to fall right into place with what they're telling you to do, right? But see, it worked against everybody, because it was the exceptions. It was not the norm. It wasn't the real reality, right? There was, he said he was healthy, but when you looked into it further, they weren't, right? I mean, there was something going on. And then you even complicate that by people that got flu shots from 2015 on. They had certain COVID strains that caused younger people to react very negatively to the virus. So there was a lot of factors. But again, it was those stories that really lock people into like, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. So we have to use it now the opposite. We have to use the stories, right, to, you know, get people to think a little different.
Mm-hmm. How much do you feel like this perpetual toxicity burden that we're facing, you know, that eventually makes its way into the brain? I mean, you mentioned just the history of people with flu shots and different things, or higher susceptibility for, you know, new emerging issues from tick bites to yeast to the next virus or what have you. How much of a role do you think this chronic inflammatory state that's showing up in our body is affecting this cognitive dissonance, or maybe some of these decisions that we make? And, you know, because we see this a lot with the addiction people that we work with. They just make bad decisions typically because they keep doing the same thing, because they can't really open up that lens anymore. Their brain is so inflamed. Their decision-making ability is just not there. So I'd love for you to take what we're talking about and sort of take that into that inflammatory effect that's showing up in a lot of people's brains.
You know, just in the last 10 years, it's stunning of how much worse what you just said has gotten. And to the point where even my children, their generation, I keep reminding them that, look, you're going to be the leaders. Just don't get, and my kids are kind of beyond that now, but if I take my language back even 5 years ago, just don't get hooked on drugs and you're going to lead your generation, right? Meaning that there's pitfalls, don't fall into those, but because you stand so clearly different in how your brain works, the health of your brain, to your point, you will in fact be looked at, you know, to lead. And that's exactly what's happening with my twins will be 25 coming up this September, my 23-year-old, 21-year-old, and now even my 17-year-old. You know, they are absolutely stand different in their health than their friends, clearly. And those that do stand different will be the leaders of that generation, will lead them out of where they're at, because most of my kids' friends are taking Adderall, just to, you know, they're smoking marijuana, uppers, downers, you name it, stimulants. I mean, this is the generation. Psychotropic drugs, to take another step further. I haven't even talked about street drugs, right? I'm just talking about the ones that are, you know, prescribed, if you will. Well, okay, marijuana is not. Well, maybe today it is prescribed some places. So that's kind of crossing over. That's why I didn't know where to put it. But the fact is that what we have is a perfect storm. We have, you're right, most of these toxins that people are so massively being overwhelmed with, even heavy metals from the time in utero from their parents. Now we're being exposed to massive levels of a chemical called glyphosate, which is sprayed on the food. Scientists from MIT and others are showing how that one chemical is allowing these other neurotoxins to go right into the brain. It opens up the protective barrier of the brain, called the blood-brain barrier. It's causing more neurodegenerative conditions than we've ever seen before. Dementia, Alzheimer's, and just, you know, back up before you would even get one of those diagnoses. Well, it's causing massive brain fog. To your point, if they can't even think their way through a logical decision to make a logical decision, or you know, at least one that took some thought. So it's easier then just to do what you're told, or it's easier just to do what everyone else does, because it's becoming so more difficult for people to literally pick up something and actually read something of value that would help them make a better decision, because the brain is just in survival mode. Nick, I don't know the percent, Sonya, I don't know the percent of people that, you know, are functioning that way, but I'm telling you, it's massive. And it is, to your point, it is these neurotoxins. These are types of toxins that cross into the nerve system, into the brain, and are causing massive amounts of brain fog in people. And that's where it starts, is brain fog. I just can't think. I can't even read. I can't even remember what I read anymore. So why should I bother? You know, decisions, they're overwhelming to me. I have this anxiety. They're just showing up to work. They're doing what they're doing, and they're in survival mechanism. And that's a bad place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't help but think, like, I mean, you're kind of there. Like, when you tell your story about this chronic overwhelm, you know, where you're laid out, you're so fatigued, You know, you talk a lot about how what your recovery process was like. My goodness, throw a pandemic on top of someone who's dealing with this heavy PTSD, head trauma, chronic toxicity. It's kind of like just get me through. I mean, this is kind of how we feel when we've got a fever or something. It's like, I just want to feel better, right? And people, I just want this pandemic to be over with. Let's get on with it. You know, it's like, I can see why people get stuck in that type of thinking and just want someone to tell them what to do.
I totally, you're right. I was there, and I did lose my brain, and I just, getting through the day was enough, like, let alone make a decision for my family that was going to potentially affect us one way or another. At that point, I'm yielding, to whoever. Right. So yeah, great point there.
And then you think about the generations to come. So if there's a young family that's dealing with this within themselves, and now, the wife gets pregnant and she's dealing with her own stresses, all those hormones and everything are now going through the placenta, all the toxicity is going there. And now kids are being born with adrenal insufficiency or these toxic levels and getting diagnosed with ADHD when they're going to school. It's like, it's this perpetual cycle that keeps happening. So where do you start with somebody? Like, how do you, because when somebody's stuck, it's like time has frozen in that moment. So how do you unstick them from their habits or from their lens, or help them widen their lens so they can really see that? I know you're using stories, but is there some other ways through the physical body so that there's more clarity?
Yeah, look, honestly, you can watch somebody come out of that state. My detox, the detox y'all do in your office, right? We bring them through a prep phase, bring them through a body phase, ultimately to get them to a brain phase. And that's how I got my life back, right? And that's how we see thousands of people get their lives back. You can see that starting to come back. And again, I don't want to make it sound simpler than it is, meaning, just take this and hey, your brain comes back, because you see enough of that from social media. You see enough of that, just everyone hucking a product. If it was as easy as Prevagen, right? Hey, we wouldn't even have a job, but it's not, right? We have to literally in layers get these toxins out of the brain. But as they come out, it's like you get the world opens up, right? I remember, I wish I would have documented my own story much better as far as these breakthroughs, right? And of course I would pull back and start to feel the way I was, and I'd almost get panicked. It's but it just kept evolving, to the point where I could think again, right? Where I wouldn't get overwhelmed with just a simple decision, because that's where I got to. I couldn't make any decision. I remember standing in my closet looking at my shirts, and I would get anxiety because I couldn't pick one. I'm not kidding. It was my brain literally was that challenged neurotoxically that to pick a shirt was, just too much for me. Imagine making life decisions for my family.
Yeah. You kind of laughed at that, but at the same time, this is a serious reality for so many people. We had an interview with an amazing medical doctor named Dr. Mark Gordon. He was a concussion specialist. He was featured on Quiet Explosions, an amazing documentary all about, concussive injury and whatnot. And they were saying that he works a lot with veterans and, people post-war. And he was saying that it's expected about 20 million Americans per year are suffering from these head injuries. And this is just one of these events that lead to the perfect storm that you're speaking to. But the amount of trauma that lingers over time, I really think that we're not really paying enough attention to that. So I'd love for you to sort of talk a little bit more about this chronic inflammatory state, what's happening in the blood-brain barrier, is, even PTSD to the toxicity. Let's break down a little bit more on why that becomes such a vulnerable area in the body.
You mentioned, PTSD, post-traumatic, stress disorders, that are just rampant right now. You mentioned concussions, right? Here's the interesting thing. And I talked about my own story, just mercury crossing into my brain. It's all the same. The body doesn't know the difference of stress, right? Whether it's physical, chemical, or emotional. And I always like to reference what I call a perfect storm. When you have three stressors that come together, that's when the bottom falls out. Tora Bright, she was a client of mine. She was, I don't know if you know who she is, but double Olympic gold medalist in snowboarding. She had been to the best of the best for her concussions. Her concussions took her out of the sport, but it went beyond just not being able to do her sport. Massive brain fog. She became unfunctional, right? I mean, just, was it just the head trauma? Well, when I worked with her, I worked with her a little differently. I looked at it as I looked at her history and was like, man, she was loaded up with other neurotoxins, just mercury being one of them, very similar to me. And me realizing that the head traumas, there's studies that show that head traumas allow neurotoxins to penetrate even deeper and drive more inflammation in the brain. But I realized, though, that she had this accumulating effect of these physical and chemical stressors. And that's the way I approached it. So, got her into a brain phase, did multiple fasts for her because, magic happens during fasted states, especially with concussion and head and brain traumas. But it was a multi-therapeutic approach of dealing with the chemical stress and the physical stressors, and then doing something like fasting where the body naturally can de-inflame, especially neurotissue like the brain. So I remember at one of my seminars, I showed some of the top neurologists in the world talking about fasting and why fasting can change the brain so rapidly. My own daughter hit her head and we fasted her. And, she was just blown out. Now, if she didn't do that, she would have brain complications for years to come, if not forever, but we fasted her immediately. And that happened twice to her, by the way. So the bottom line is that you can't just look at it in your area to deal with post-traumatic stress, head trauma, it's a combination of these stressors, and you have to peel back all of them.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we love, that you talk about those upstream factors and you talk about the foundation of everything, because my lens is very much hormones. So I'll look at a woman's hormones and how things are affecting them, but I'm teaching them that that's an effect, not a cause. Exactly. But often we're labeling these other things as causes, and then we're just looking at that and just looking at it through that lens. And we forget that these foundational things like fasting, detoxifying, just cleaning up the communication is going to be the thing that's going to help support your hormones, your nutrients, your vitamins, everything to do what they need to do.
Yeah. And you, Sonya, you really have mastered, helping women through complicated hormone issues. But, to your point, right? If it were only as so easy as just to give somebody hormones, whether it be bioidentical, regular, and of course there's a time and a place, but most hormone issues there's something going on upstream. How many people, practitioners, functional medicine, alternative, regular, are digging for those upstream stressors to why your hormones are dysregulated. And by the way, the main control tower of all your hormones in the body sits in the brain, the pituitary hypothalamus. That's like in an airport, when you see that big tower that's literally directing every plane to come in. If you took that out, planes would literally be crashing. That's what's going on with hormone havoc in people's bodies, right? Because the control tower, where do most neurotoxins bioaccumulate according to studies? Yeah, right in the control tower, right in the pituitary hypothalamus, right? The hypothalamus takes in all of the information, just like the guys on the radio up in the tower. Then they're telling people to tell, the pilots what to do. And there's a group telling them, okay, you're going to land on this, this runway, And it looks so easy. It goes on day after day in a healthy body or a healthy airport. But I'll tell you what, one guy comes in drunk one day and bad things happen, right? Yeah. That's why they have such standards.
Great analogy.
Yeah, I'm going to roll with this example in the future. It's a good one. Yeah. But the fact is that's what happens. So slowly these neurotoxins are crossing into the brain, and it's like one more, brain fog person showing up, that got by the FTC and is working in the control tower. You put 5 of those guys in there and now, bad things are, happening. So anyways, we have to still look upstream even for hormones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing I think that's so poorly misunderstood too is just the acute environmental impact of toxicity exposure. I remember you talking about even just sometimes going to a gas station and just smelling the fumes. And like, that's getting, I don't think people really appreciate the fact that that's literally getting into your brain just like that, and, you were talking about the jab earlier. I just realized that, one of those 180-degree solutions or understandings was that people think that you put the jab and it just stays right there. It doesn't go anywhere. Like, it just magically somehow compartmentalizes there. And there's that Japanese study showing that, the nanoparticles of the lipid particles were getting into the ovaries and the testes. There's some concern about the blood-brain barrier. We're seeing some of the side effects of clotting and stuff like that. To think that something just, maybe either magically stays in a certain area, does not penetrate your brain, or somehow your body just magically eliminates it. I mean, these are all these perceived misunderstandings that are causing a huge amount of confusion for people.
No, I don't think it's any of our role to tell someone to get the jab or not, right? But, our cry is, my goodness, you understand, number one, that it's a phase 3 trial right now, meaning that this has never been tested, right? They're testing on you. Okay, so I've chosen to be in the placebo group, right? It's like, I've chosen to be in the control group. Thank you. That's me. But the point though is that, look, we are in uncharted territory, right? It's like, so I think every one of our parents would say, hey, look, I wouldn't do that, right? Meaning that I wouldn't do this because there's a danger to you without looking into it further. Don't be the first one to do. I mean, all the advice would be all over it. So we're taking this great risk, because the experts already have been way wrong. I mean, already I don't know, one of the scientists for one of the companies basically was like, okay, we know why it's causing these bleeds, right? Because we thought it was going to stay in the cytoplasm, but a lot of it's entering into the nucleus of the cell. But it's okay. We know how to fix it. How many deaths? I mean, what is going on, right? Okay, so we've been told to be more cautious about our health, and yet we're taking this great risk in why. Okay, everyone knows somebody that COVID affected, et cetera, but the facts still don't lie. And here I go with facts again. And I told you, don't lead with facts, but regardless, 99.97 survival rate. And we're doing something that has, is having massive health problems in healthy people, for goodness sakes. I'll tell you a story right here in Utah. Father and son got the jab, and he was 17-year-old basketball star. Well, rushed to the hospital, basically bleed from his aorta in his brain, right? Life-threatening situation. The father is dealing with his son, denying his own symptoms. He ends up in the hospital. I believe he's still in the hospital, and he has multiple pulmonary embolisms that are happening because of bleeds. They can't even count, and he's life or death situation. And one more story. I was on the phone a week ago with one of my clients from the UK, and I didn't recognize her. And I said, wow, what happened? I could tell something was not right. And she says, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I went ahead and did this so I could see my father, because he's 78 years old. He said that wouldn't see me without it. I did it. Okay. She was obviously in a massive state of autoimmune, and her father is now on his deathbed, not able to speak. He had a brain bleed, a hemorrhage. So I mean, this is the reality. Now, don't you think that even if 5% of the population were nowhere near that was dying, it would still be wise to make sure that something was safe before we give it to our family? Of course, that's the logical sense, but the fear, as we said before, they utilize fear. But let's now shift that fear to make a better decision and make sure something's safe before we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. On the topic of 180-degree solutions again, I mean, just to go back to another story, one that you faced with great challenge was Daniel, when Daniel had this, Dr. Pompa's son had this massive accident. was playing with his friends or jumping off cliffs like all of us young folks have done in the past, and had this massive injury and miscalculated the jump or what have you. And I mean, you guys are faced with a decision that, you know, 99.9% of the people would have said, let's do surgery. I mean, it was remarkable to hear this healing story that you took your son through. And I'd love for you to touch in on some of these things, because where I'd love this conversation to go is into like resiliency, building resiliency, trusting, and, you know, having faith and applying, you know, this multi-therapeutic approach. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about that journey of going in a different direction.
By the way, a lot of things that we took my son into a miraculous healing, you all do in your office. But, you know, it was a tough decision. Just to give you a little bit of the background, my son and his friends were jumping off this 60-foot cliff into the water. And my son decided to go first, where the kid who jumped there before was going to the bathroom in the woods. And he decided just to, let's get this over with, I guess. And he jumped what logically looked like the way to go. You clear the first little bluff, but the problem was he did that, and then he looked down and realized there was another, and literally dropped 50 feet, almost at terminal velocity, and hit his heel first, and then square on his butt. And I mean, you should have seen that picture. I mean, it was black, and oh gosh, but he just hit, and of course, right there, that impact would have killed most people on the spot. First miracle was that. Second miracle was, you know, he hit and then he just flopped in the water. There happened to be a boat there that pulled him out because he would have drowned. The third miracle was the fact that he should have been paralyzed. The doctors couldn't figure out every bit of the bone fragments. 2 vertebrae just shattered completely. They moved forward, not into the spinal cord. So another absolute miracle. But we were faced then with a decision where they were saying we have to come in from the anterior, open him up, and then they're going to fuse. They're going to take all those vertebrae out and put a cage in, metal cage, and fill it with the bones, the pieces basically. And I said, look, give me 24 hours. You know, I could advise my son correctly because, you know, he was an adult at that point. And they said that's reasonable. They had to kind of wait anyway, make sure there was no clots, etc. And I spent the night digging through studies, and I found 2 that were dealing very much with exactly what we were dealing with. And the ligaments, the stability of the ligaments played the biggest role. And they told me that all of the ligaments were ruptured. So it looked like we were to do the surgery, that it was going to be the best outcome. Then the head surgeon, we were in a conversation, and he said something regarding, I said something, well, I guess it, you know, because all the ligaments are ruptured, then we would. And he said, well, we don't know that for sure. We're assuming that. I'm like, well, is there a way that we can know for sure? Because the studies showed that was a really important factor. So fast forward, they did an MRI upon Daniel and my request, and they weren't all ruptured. Matter of fact, one of the big stabilizers was still intact. And we opted out. They thought we were absolutely nuts. They did. They said, well, we'll have to do some stabilizing x-ray in a few weeks. And he looked at my son and said, Daniel, don't get your hopes up. You know, there's no way your spine's going to hold. Well, in that time, 2.5 weeks, the x-ray, it did hold. And not only that, they were stunned at the amount of healing that we did in that time. And again, as I said, a lot of things that we did for my son, y'all do in your clinic. But, you know, my son has no metal in his back. We opted out of the surgery. To your point, I believe 1,000 out of 1,000, because of the fear that they put us on, you know, would have done that surgery, and rightfully so. I mean, you know, who could think around that? But having a little bit of information, I was able to make a different decision. And my son's amazing. You know, he's amazing.
Well, it's information and trust, you know, the trust in the medicine that you do deliver, and also in the body and in his healing and knowing his foundation. I think that plays a huge role in anybody's healing.
Yeah, it's true. And he was bound and determined. I mean, I did every possible thing. And my son did everything I told him. I mean, you know, so I'm saying me, but it was really the 2 of us, and, you know, mom was involved too. But I mean, once we got him home, and we got him home in 2 weeks, because once we opted out of the surgery, they were just like, you know, get him out. There's nothing we can do. We don't want to change his bedpans, although I was, you know, so that was a little bit difficult. But, you know, I would drag him out in the sun in his hospital bed from the thing. I had it near the door because I was putting him in the sun every day, remodeling the bone. And, you know, I mean, I was grounding him. I mean, we were doing TRT, pulse, exosome. I mean, you name it, we did it all. But you know, so again, the first miracles, that was all God. This, you know, after that, I applied what we do.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I wanted you to share the story, because, you know, I think it's so often where we sort of lose faith. We lose faith in the body. We lose faith in our ability to make decisions that serve ourselves, serve our communities, serve our families. And really, I wanted this really to be a message of hope and of a way to really understand and appreciate that discernment. And if there's a way to tune into that knowing within and that space within, you know, like you talked about the professional snowboarder, you created space by teaching her and encouraging her to fast and letting the body heal. And, you know, when we're faced with challenge, you know, whether it's like this outside treatment is going to be the only protection for you, it's so disempowering. It's so dismantling to our nervous system to think that we don't have power over our own bodies and we can actually work with that healing power of our body. And so I'm so glad that you shared that story. And I've been, for a couple of years now, I've been really wanting to get you to share that story in our podcast, because I think it's just so important. We need to know that we can trust in hope. We need to know that we can trust in the healing power of the body. And then we need to know that we can research for ourselves. We can ask those questions. We can listen to these stories, because that story that you just shared and that you've shared with many, many people is this message of hope. And that's what we need right now. I think that's a powerful healing tool in and of itself. So yeah, I'm so glad that you got a chance to share that.
You know, it was partly a question you asked earlier, you know, or maybe Sonya asked it, you know, it's how you come to these decisions. What gave me the courage to move in an very opposite direction than the expert's advice was, right? You know, intuitively, I trust and verify, right? Meaning that I had no reason not to trust his opinion, right? It was nothing personal against the head surgeon there. I believed that he believed that surgery was the only way to go for my son. So no criticism there at all, by the way. However, my major premise is very different than his and most people's, and so is yours. But I believe that we need to examine our major premise. That means our major beliefs that really determine how we make decisions in our life. And, you know, you tipped your hand there in, you know, your major premise is that you truly believe the body has an ability to heal itself. Decisions we make in us and our children's lives are underneath that major premise, right? And here's the good and the bad news. If your major premise is wrong, then typically every decision and everything under that ends up to be wrong and bad decisions, right? So maybe people watching this, their major premise is, you know what? I trust the experts. They've got it figured out. And I might look at the life and the outcomes and say, well, how's that working for you? Maybe it worked a few times, you know, but I believe that modern medicine today is really, the premise is man will figure it out. Man has all the answers. I run a different premise than that. I believe God has designed our bodies in such a way that we can't ever duplicate the healing. We can never figure out what the body can figure out. So my goal is to remove interference, let innate intelligence do the healing. But I'm so deep in that major premise that I know my son's body can heal. I know if we just let it alone, remove the interference, give it everything that it needs, sunshine, but the vitamin D, the K2, and everything that formulates bone, remove all the stuff, and it'll heal. I believed it, that I was able to go 180 degrees opposite that advice. And you know what? I remember the one, I wish I could have got the head surgeon's comments, but the other surgeon said, you know what? I was on one of the naysayers, I'll admit, but you know what? He did the right thing. I'm amazed, right? And that's when she looked at the the x-ray, the second one, after, it was just like, holy cow. Even me, I was like, wow. But again, though, I mean, how do we have to, all of us, even other premises, we have to look at our major premises, especially in times like these. What do you believe, right? Maybe we have a false major premise, whether it's about money, whether it's about health. But if it's wrong, we end up looking at our lives going, how did I get here? Probably because one of your premises is wrong. And you know what? Oftentimes, someone we loved gave us this false major premise, right? That with good intentions. But needless to say, it led us to a lot of bad in our life. So we can change it, right? We can change those premises. I've changed many, along the way, going, wow, was I wrong about that? I got to think about that different, and then watch your life change when you change that major belief.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's why we love you there. What you just shared, that was brilliant. That was amazing.
Yeah, because our neurons, they form those circuits and those patterns, and they're stuck there. And I remember listening to a neuroscientist once, and she said it's a metabolic expense on the body to break them. So it has to really come from this belief and from this faith and this like commitment to understanding it, so we can break it and then create those new ones that are actually going to serve us. Because if you look at medicine way back before, it was about that. It was about this foundation and utilizing nature and the body and how connected that is, but we've just forgotten. So I think it's really about remembering. It's all there. It's just about helping other people remember that within them again.
Yeah. Every bit of healing, really, it does start with thoughts. And Sonya, to your point, it's so powerful, because we talked a little bit about a toxic brain and how hard it is to make decisions. We can take this conversation to a whole nother step, and the scientific word is called neuroplasty. And, when we look at how the brain's wired, what you just said, right, we realize that the decisions we make, for better or for worse, is a wiring, typically. And unfortunately, many of us wire in fear patterns, and we're making poor decisions because we can't even think outside of it any other way. But we can change that wiring. We can change our wiring even to a body that heals better than a body that doesn't. And this, it sounds a little woo-woo, but I'm telling you, this is scientific fact, right? We have people that they're blown out, most of their brain with a stroke. And yet working with the right therapist that knows neuroplasty can go around those massive traumas and rewire the brain and get somebody to talk again, move limbs again. I mean, it's pretty miraculous. There's I wish I had it right here, a book that I'm reading called The Brain That Changes Itself.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Norman Doidge.
Yeah, Norman Doidge. Amazing. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think that's good for our viewers, because it's stories. He teaches in stories, but it's the history of neuroplasty. But after you read enough of the stories, whatever you're dealing with, from an emotional trauma to a physical trauma, something that's not healing, something bad, I think you'll have the courage to realize your premise of where healing comes from will change. I promise you that. But I think it'll give you the courage that, in hope that, wow, my healing starts with thinking different, and dang it, I'm going to think different. And I'm telling you that at first intention will set off, literally a whole different, outcome in your future.
Mm-hmm. You're talking my jam, Dr. Pompa. This is the stuff I love.
It's so good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to ask any other questions before I ask.
No, I think.
Yeah, this is a good place.
It's so good. Yeah.
So my question for you, I mean, you've had so many different experiences in your life where you've seen your son challenged and you've seen yourself challenged in your physical body. And, we have these moments that bring up these challenges, but we build resilience from it. We build a different lens from it as well. And we come so close to, I believe there's a veil between like birth and death, like even with our thoughts and with the way the body's healing, there's always a cell's always dying and another one's being reborn. And, if you were to look at your life in totality and knowing that maybe tomorrow was it, what's the imprint that you want to leave on the rest of the world?
Wow. I'll tell you, I think we've all, and you've heard me say this, I believe we all have a purpose, yes, but I think it goes beyond purpose into promise, and that promise that God gave me when I was sick to my wife, that, not only was I going to get well, but take a message to the world. That message I've recently, God laid on me that he was carrying that legacy through my children. And, I just got goosebumps because, I feel like some of that has already been accomplished, but it is honestly, so much of the message that we just spoke about in this interview, is what still excites me more than ever, that the body can heal itself, and looking in these areas where most people aren't, of what's really needing to be removed, including our thoughts, as we just discussed, right? That's really it. And bringing, a unique way of detoxing the brain to the world. That I hope is my legacy.
It is.
It's living on in us. And
yes.
yeah. And I mean, I couldn't help but think as well, when you were speaking about your son, just, you talked about it as the central unit of what your family went through, but the impact that you had on the surgeons, on that hospital, the stories that reverberate after you guys have been there. And, and then that's that same message that goes through every patient we work with, through, every talk every conference you teach at, the permutation into each of these stories that you spoke of at the beginning that were so important for people to really anchor in, because we do remember those stories.
Mm-hmm.
And those stories become part of that belief system, that new structure, that new way of operating in our own lives, but also that new way of really appreciating this relationship to Mother Earth and God and everything that makes us or allows us to move into our healing and our purpose, as you mentioned. So the brilliance with which you speak, Dan, I mean, I remember pulling you aside at one point when I think we just signed on to be docs with you. And I said, Dan, I want to do what you're doing. And I truly feel like I am now, and I'm so grateful to you. We are so grateful to you.
Yeah, well, I love you both, and you are doing it in a big way and making a difference and a legacy, right? Butterfly effect. I haven't spoken on it in a long time, but it's these little waves that we make that end up to be, hurricanes in another part of the world, right? And an effect that it can have. So y'all are having a bigger effect than you think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, this was an amazing episode. I can't wait for people to tune in. Dr. P, there's going to be a lot of doctors that want to keep learning from you. What are the best ways? I mean, you're on social media, thanks to, I think, the whole family helping support your platforms and everything. But what are the best ways that you think people can follow you? You've obviously got Cell TV, but please share
the podcast is one way. It's if you just go to cellularhealing.tv, pretty easy. You can get to the podcast. Also, my website, drpompa.com, and you can access a lot there as well.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So much love to you, Dan. Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks, guys.